Welcome to Outside Views, where today we're delving into one of the most critical issues facing Northern Ireland right now, the upcoming vote on post-Brexit trading arrangements. This vote has been set in motion by the Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn, who recently triggered a process allowing the Stormont Assembly to decide if Northern Ireland should continue following these post-Brexit rules. The vote, as expected, has brought back heated debates about Northern Ireland's unique and often complicated position within the United Kingdom and the European Union. Specifically, the Assembly will vote on Articles 5 to 10 of the Windsor Framework, which has been highly contentious since its creation. These articles govern how trade is regulated in Northern Ireland, keeping it aligned with certain EU standards, while other parts of the UK have diverged post-Brexit. And this arrangement, according to unionists, threatens Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, which is why the Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, led by Gavin Robinson, is opposing the continuation of the Windsor Framework and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Robinson has been very vocal about this position, reminding everyone that his party has consistently fought against what they view as an arrangement that sacrifices Northern Ireland's identity and the ties to the UK for the sake of avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. He's even called on other pro-union members within the Assembly to stand with the DUP, arguing that any elected representative who values the union should oppose these arrangements. But before we get into the DUP strategy and their concerns, let's unpack what this vote actually entails and why it's structured the way it is. Unlike other significant votes in the Stormont Assembly, this particular decision does not require cross-community support. In most cases, especially on sensitive issues, votes in Stormont need to pass with a majority from both the unionist and nationalist communities. This mechanism, known as the cross-community vote, has been one of the core elements of Northern Ireland's power-sharing arrangements, especially since the Good Friday Agreement. However, in this case, a simple majority is all that's needed to pass the motion on the Windsor Framework. If a simple majority supports it, the post-Brexit trading arrangements will continue for another 4 years, but there's an additional detail to consider. If the vote receives support from both a majority of unionists and a majority of nationalists, then the framework will be extended for an even longer period, 8 years to be exact. This difference in the voting requirement, when compared to other significant votes at Stormont, has been a major point of contention for unionists like Robinson. For them, this vote structure seems to bypass what they see as a fundamental principle of the Belfast Agreement, that decisions with major implications for Northern Ireland should have the backing of both communities. The DUP believes that this new voting framework for the Windsor Framework undermines Northern Ireland's established governance structure, driving a wedge into the cross-community consent that has historically been the foundation of political progress in Northern Ireland. Robinson has pointed out that this arrangement shows an aversion to the protections that have traditionally been attached to significant issues in Northern Ireland, arguing that the vote is designed to allow pro-protocol forces to push through without needing unionist support. So how did we get to this point? It's no secret that Brexit has placed Northern Ireland in an incredibly unique and complex position. When the UK voted to leave the European Union, a major challenge was ensuring that the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland remained open. This border, which became nearly invisible during the peace process, has been one of the most symbolic achievements of the Good Friday Agreement. Yet, Brexit threatened to create a hard border between the Republic of Ireland, which is an EU member, and Northern Ireland, which left the EU along with the rest of the United Kingdom. The solution, or at least attempted solution, was the Northern Ireland Protocol and then the Windsor Framework. And this framework essentially places Northern Ireland in a hybrid regulatory position where it remains aligned with certain EU rules for goods to ensure that no hard border is necessary. By keeping goods flowing freely across the border with Ireland, it preserves both the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland's economic stability. However, as this vote shows, The compromise hasn't satisfied everyone. Many unionists, and particularly the DUP, see the Windsor Framework as a decision that places Northern Ireland outside the full regulatory control of the UK and closer to the EU than they are comfortable with. They view the framework as a compromise that came at the expense of Northern Ireland's full integration with the UK market, and they fear that it erodes Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom itself. To them, the hybrid arrangement is a step towards detaching Northern Ireland from the UK in subtle but significant ways. As such, the upcoming vote isn't just a procedural matter, it's a battleground for what Northern Ireland's future relationship with both the UK and the EU will look like. Now, let's consider the different possible outcomes of the vote. If the Assembly votes to maintain the Windsor Framework, it essentially signals that the existing arrangement will remain for at least another 4 years. And this would mean that Northern Ireland continues to operate under EU-aligned regulations for certain goods, keeping its regulatory environment distinct from the rest of the UK. Additionally, there would be a mandatory review of how these arrangements are working, which would provide an opportunity for the Assembly to re-evaluate and assess the framework's impact on Northern Ireland's economy and the social fabric. The DUP has already made it clear that if the vote favours continuing the framework, they'll continue to oppose it through every means available. They plan to campaign against the protocol throughout the review process, drawing on new mechanisms and lobbying efforts to emphasize the lack of consent from the unionist community. In other words, they intend to keep the opposition going, even if this vote doesn't go in their favour. Their goal is to spotlight what they view as a severe breach of Northern Ireland's right to consent and the undermining of the cross-community voting structure. On the other hand, if the Assembly votes against maintaining the Windsor Framework and with it the protocol, the consequences could be even more complex. Rejecting the framework would mean that Northern Ireland would need to find an alternative approach to manage trade with the EU and the rest of the UK. And this would almost certainly lead to a renegotiation with both the EU and the UK and potentially the return of a hard border on the island of Ireland, and that would need to be addressed once again. And such a scenario would underscore that Brexit's consequences are far from settled, particularly when it comes to Northern Ireland's unique position. And this brings us to the procedural framework that Assembly Speaker Edwin Poots has announced in anticipation of the vote. Poots clarified that if First Minister Michelle O'Neill and Deputy First Minister Emma Little-Pengley do not table a motion by the end of November, any member of the Legislative Assembly or MLA can do so between December 1st and December 6th. He emphasized the importance of explanatory material for members of the Assembly to fully understand the implications of the vote. This material would help contextualize the impact of the Windsor Framework and what it truly means for Northern Ireland's future. If a motion is tabled but remains undecided by December 17th, the Assembly is required to convene on that date to make a decision regardless of other parliamentary business. As we consider the wider implications of this vote, it's crucial to remember that Northern Ireland's post-Brexit arrangements don't exist in isolation. The outcome of this vote will be watched closely by the rest of the United Kingdom, the European Union, and perhaps even beyond. If the Assembly decides to continue the Windsor Framework, it may signal to some that this regulatory model, while controversial, is functional. But if they vote against it, the decision could push the UK and the EU back to the negotiation table, opening a new chapter in the Brexit saga that many had hoped was finally drawing to a close. For the UK government, a vote to reject the framework would create a diplomatic challenge, forcing it to balance Northern Ireland's distinct needs with the broader objectives of Brexit. It would be a reminder that Brexit's promises of simplicity and sovereignty have been anything but straightforward, particularly for Northern Ireland, which remains caught in the crosshairs of two diverging regulatory systems. To summarize, this vote process triggered by Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn is not just another bureaucratic step. It's a significant decision point with long-term ramifications for Northern Ireland's political landscape and its place within both the UK and the EU. Whether the vote passes or fails, it will shape the future of Brexit's impact on Northern Ireland and may very well have broader repercussions for the UK as a whole. For many unionists, this vote is a battle to uphold Northern Ireland's identity within the UK. For others, it's a pragmatic approach to keep the peace and maintain economic stability. But regardless of perspective, it's a high-stakes moment that will leave a lasting mark on Northern Ireland's political history and its relationship with both London and Brussels. Thank you for watching Outside Views, and if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.